In the endless blue waters of the Pacific during the Second World War, where massive steel warships battled under blazing tropical sunshine, the destiny of entire nations balanced on a knife's edge. A single humble destroyer escort would achieve something no other naval vessel in maritime history had ever accomplished. This remains true even today. Here unfolds the incredible story of the USS England. In merely 12 days, this one American warship would send 6 enemy submarines to the ocean floor. The record she set was so extraordinary that no vessel has ever matched it since. From May 19th through May 31st in 1944, this lone American ship would methodically track down and obliterate an entire chain of Japanese submarines. She changed naval warfare forever. She proved how devastatingly effective new submarine hunting technology could be. The USS England story goes far beyond mere technological dominance or clever tactics. This tale stands as powerful proof of what happens when human bravery meets breakthrough intelligence and cutting-edge innovation. All of this occurred under the most brutal conditions imaginable. The story doesn't begin with booming cannons or spectacular sea battles. Instead, it starts in the quiet, systematic work of American codebreakers. These men labored inside a plain, unremarkable building at Pearl Harbor. On May 13, 1944, something remarkable happened. The Fleet Radio Unit Pacific intercepted a seemingly routine Japanese radio message. This unit was known by the codename Frupak. It had taken over from the legendary commander Joseph Rochefort's station Hypo. The intercepted transmission came from submarine I-16. The message was directed to the commander of Japanese Submarine Division 7. On the surface, it contained what appeared to be boring operational details. An estimated time of arrival at Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. The scheduled time was 2200 hours on May 22nd. But, to the sharp eyes of American intelligence officers, this intercepted message meant something far more precious. They saw an opportunity to strike directly at Japan's underwater fleet. The chance was extraordinary. The intelligence operation that would enable England's stunning success had deep roots. Years of careful, exhausting work by American code analysts made it possible. Since the war's early days, teams of brilliant minds had worked in absolute secrecy. Mathematicians joined linguists and puzzle solvers in this critical mission. They labored to crack Japanese naval codes. Their work took place in rooms without windows. These spaces overflowed with IBM tabulating machines. Mountains of paper covered every surface. Their efforts had already helped America win at Midway and in the Solomon Islands. But never before had decoded intelligence been used so directly in submarine warfare. Never had it been so devastatingly effective. Breaking the Japanese naval code JN-25 demanded more than mathematical genius. It required deep cultural knowledge and linguistic mastery. Every message had to be intercepted first. Then it was recorded carefully. Analysts searched for patterns within the coded text. Finally came the painstaking decoding process. This combined mechanical computation with pure human intuition. The atmosphere in these code-breaking rooms was intense. Men worked around the clock in shifts. Coffee cups accumulated on desks. Cigarette smoke filled the air. The pressure was enormous. Lives hung in the balance of their work. One small error could mean disaster for American forces. Success could save hundreds of lives and change the course of battles. The decoded intelligence traveled immediately through secure channels. It went first to the 3rd Fleet headquarters. From there, it reached Commander Hamilton Haines. He commanded Escort Division 39. His base was at Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. Haines brought valuable experience to this moment. He was a veteran destroyer commander who had fought German U-boats in the Atlantic. That experience hunting submarines would prove absolutely crucial in the coming battle. Haynes didn't waste a single moment organizing his response. He immediately ordered the formation of a 3-ship hunter-killer task group. He handpicked the finest anti-submarine vessels available for this vital mission. The group would consist of 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts. Each ship had been chosen for specific reasons. USS George operated under Lieutenant Commander Fred W. Just's command. USS Raby, designated DE-698, served under Lieutenant Commander James Scott. USS England, bearing the number DE-635, sailed under Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton's leadership. England was temporarily pulled from Escort Division 40 at Purvis Bay on Florida Island. She joined this urgent mission at the last minute. All 3 warships departed Purvis Bay on May 18, 1944. Commander Haynes sailed aboard George as the officer in tactical command. The selection of these 3 ships was absolutely deliberate. Each vessel had received special equipment and training for anti-submarine warfare. Their crews had spent countless months perfecting their deadly skills. They had trained in the dangerous waters surrounding the Solomon Islands. These ships had operated together before. They had developed the teamwork and communication that would prove essential. The coordinated attacks to come would demand perfect synchronization. Their crews were young and relatively green in combat, but they had been drilled mercilessly in sonar operation. They knew attack procedures by heart. Damage control had become second nature. This intensive preparation would soon pay off beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The submarine hunt was part of something much larger unfolding across the Pacific. That same day, the task force departed. Additional radio intelligence revealed troubling news. The Japanese were creating a scouting line of 7 submarines. This formation carried the designation NA Line. It stretched between the Admiralty Islands north of New Guinea and Truk in the Caroline Islands. This submarine picket line sat directly across the route American carriers were expected to use. The Japanese High Command anticipated new Allied landings, but they remained uncertain about the exact target. Would the Americans strike the Marianas? Perhaps the Western Caroline Islands? Or would they hit the western end of New Guinea? The strategic thinking behind Japanese submarine deployment reflected their desperate situation in mid-1944. Their carrier force had been decimated in previous battles. Their island bases were increasingly cut off from support. Submarines represented one of the few remaining tools for gathering intelligence. They might also disrupt American operations if used correctly. The NA line was designed as an early warning system. It would give the Japanese fleet precious time to respond to American movements. Each submarine received orders for a specific patrol area. They were to remain on station and report any American naval activity they detected. The rigid nature of these assignments would prove fatal. This approach differed dramatically from the flexible patrol areas used by American submarines. The Japanese plan contained a fundamental flaw that would doom their submarines. Japanese strategic planners had been analyzing recent American carrier strikes. These attacks had supported General Douglas MacArthur's westward advance along New Guinea's northern coast. The analysts concluded that western New Guinea was the most likely American target. In response, Admiral Suemu Toyoda issued new orders. He commanded the Japanese combined fleet. His plan was called Operation A-Go. It was intended to be the decisive naval battle that would halt the American advance. The operation would protect Japan's inner defense perimeter. This encompassed the Marianas, Western Caroline Islands, and Western New Guinea. The execution of this plan would ultimately lead to catastrophic Japanese defeats. History would remember these as the Battle of the Philippine Sea and the Marianas Turkey Shoot. In June 1944, Japan would lose 3 aircraft carriers. Hundreds of irreplaceable pilots and aircraft would be destroyed. The losses would cripple Japanese naval aviation permanently. The planning for Operation Eigo revealed fundamental weaknesses in Japanese naval strategy by 1944. The loss of experienced pilots at Midway, the Eastern Solomons, and Santa Cruz had never been fully replaced. New pilots were being rushed through abbreviated training programs. They lacked the skills of their predecessors. Meanwhile, American pilot training had become a massive industrial operation. It was producing thousands of highly skilled aviators every month. The technological gap was widening rapidly, too. American fighters like the F-6F Hellcat significantly outperformed their Japanese counterparts. American ships bristled with radar-directed anti-aircraft guns. Attacking them had become increasingly suicidal for Japanese pilots. The quality difference was becoming overwhelming. To support Operation Eigo, Vice Admiral Takagi Takao took action. He commanded the Japanese 6th Fleet submarines. Takagi directed submarines from the 7th Submarine Squadron to establish the NA scouting line. Takagi was a veteran submarine commander. He had witnessed the steady deterioration of Japan's underwater fleet firsthand. At the war's start, Japanese submarines had been among the world's best. They had highly trained crews and excellent torpedoes, but losses had been devastating. Replacement crews lacked the skill and experience of their predecessors. Moreover, Japanese submarine doctrine had proven strategically flawed. It emphasized attacks on warships rather than merchant vessels. While American submarines were strangling Japan's supply lines, Japanese submarines were being hunted to extinction. They had little to show for their enormous sacrifice. In a decision that would prove absolutely fatal, 7 Japanese submarines received orders for specific fixed positions along the NA line. They were not given flexible operating areas, as American submarines typically received. This rigid positioning would become their most critical vulnerability. The rigid deployment went against every principle of effective submarine warfare. Flexibility and unpredictability were essential for submarine survival. By fixing their positions, the Japanese had made their submarines sitting ducks. The chain of events that would doom these submarines began when Japanese forces intercepted something important. An American aircraft had made a contact report on submarine RO-104. In response, the Japanese promptly radioed new orders to the entire NA line. They directed all submarines to shift their positions 60 nautical miles to the southeast. The transmission included specific coordinates for each submarine's new position. This seemingly routine operational message was intercepted by American radio intelligence. It was immediately forwarded to the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific Ocean area. There, cryptanalysts worked feverishly to extract the coordinates. The process was incredibly complex and demanding. It required more than just breaking the code. The analysts had to understand the Japanese Navy's coordinate system. They needed to grasp operational procedures completely. The Japanese used a unique grid reference system. Converting these references to standard navigation coordinates took specialized knowledge. Every detail had to be perfect. One small error could send American ships hundreds of miles off course. Though the process was complex and required careful analysis, the American codebreakers achieved complete success. They successfully extracted the precise positions of each submarine in the NA line. For the first time in the Pacific War, this ultra-secret intelligence would be sanitized and shared directly with anti-submarine forces. This gave them an unprecedented advantage in hunting enemy submarines. The advantage was almost unfair in its completeness. The intelligence proved remarkably accurate in practice. In each case, Japanese submarines would be found within 50 nautical miles of their predicted positions. Often, they were much closer than that. Sometimes they were exactly where the decoded messages indicated they would be. The precision was extraordinary and almost unbelievable. The decision to share this intelligence with tactical units represented a significant risk. If the Japanese realized their codes were compromised, they might change them immediately. This would deprive the Allies of a crucial advantage. The intelligence was simply too valuable to lose. Elaborate precautions were taken to disguise the source of the intelligence. Cover stories were carefully prepared. These attributed submarine discoveries to aerial reconnaissance or routine patrols. The crews of the destroyer escorts were told they were acting on aerial sighting reports. They never knew their success was enabled by one of the war's most closely guarded secrets. The security measures were extensive and carefully planned. Only a handful of officers knew the true source of the intelligence. False patrol reports were created to provide cover stories. Radio operators were instructed to maintain normal communication patterns. Nothing could appear unusual or suspicious. The Japanese had to believe their submarines were being found by conventional means. The 3 destroyer escorts of the hunter-killer group were all relatively new Buckley-class vessels. They were part of a massive wartime construction program. This program would eventually produce 154 of these specialized anti-submarine warships. In total, 148 were completed. Some even served with the British Royal Navy under Lend-Lease agreements. The Buckley class represented a compromise between capability and mass production. They were smaller and less expensive than fleet destroyers. They could be built quickly in commercial shipyards. Workers with limited experience could construct them. Yet they packed enough firepower and anti-submarine equipment to be deadly submarine hunters. Their diesel-electric propulsion system had both advantages and disadvantages. While it limited their top speed compared to steam-powered destroyers, it gave them exceptional range. They could operate for extended periods without refueling. This endurance was crucial for long patrol missions. In the vast Pacific, the ability to stay on station was often more important than raw speed. Each ship had been named to honor a fallen hero. This carried forward the legacy of American servicemen who had made the ultimate sacrifice. This naming tradition served more than just honoring the dead. It inspired the living who sailed these ships. The crews knew they sailed under the names of heroes. This knowledge instilled a sense of duty and determination. It went far beyond normal military obligation. They were not just fighting for their country. They were fighting to honor the memory of those who had died before them. USS George bore the name of Seaman First Class Eugene F. George. He had been posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. His heroic actions as an anti-aircraft gunner aboard the heavy cruiser USS San Francisco earned this honor. The battle occurred during the brutal naval engagement at Guadalcanal on November 12, 1942. The battle off Guadalcanal had been one of the war's most savage surface engagements. It was fought at point-blank range in complete darkness. Ships fired at each other based on muzzle flashes and shadowy silhouettes. When a damaged Japanese G-4M Betty bomber approached San Francisco, it was already aflame from anti-aircraft fire. The pilot deliberately aimed for the cruiser's gun positions in a suicide attack. Seaman George and his fellow gunners stood their ground. They continued firing at the approaching aircraft until the very moment of impact. The bomber crashed into San Francisco's bridge structure. It killed Admiral Daniel Callahan and his staff instantly. But George and his gun crew never wavered in their duty. George and several other San Francisco gunners died at their posts that terrible night. They were awarded the Navy Cross posthumously. Ships were named in their honor to ensure their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Their courage under fire became legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet. USS Raby was named for Rear Admiral James Joseph Raby. He had earned the Navy Cross during World War I. His service included commanding transatlantic convoy operations. This included the very first convoy to cross the Atlantic under American escort. Raby had been a pioneer in anti-submarine warfare during the First World War. He developed many tactics and procedures that were still being used. His experience had proven that properly escorted convoys could defeat the submarine menace. This lesson would prove crucial in both world wars. Tragically, Admiral Raby was killed in an automobile accident in 1934. He was serving as commandant of the Charleston Naval District at the time. But his legacy of protecting merchant shipping would live on. The vessel that bore his name would carry forward his dedication to defeating submarines. His pioneering work in convoy escort operations had saved countless lives. Now, his namesake would continue that vital mission. USS England carried perhaps the most poignant history of all three ships. She was named for Ensign John Charles England. He was a young naval officer who had been killed during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack occurred on December 7, 1941. England was just 4 days shy of his 21st birthday. He had volunteered to work in USS Oklahoma's radio room that fateful morning. He was trading shifts with a friend. This allowed the other man to spend more time with his family when they arrived in Hawaii. England himself was eagerly awaiting the arrival of his wife and 3-week-old daughter. He had never seen his daughter. When Japanese torpedoes struck the battleship Oklahoma, she began to capsize immediately. Ensign England initially escaped to the deck. The scene that greeted him was one of unimaginable chaos and destruction. Oklahoma was rolling over slowly but inexorably. Hundreds of men were trapped inside her massive hull. Oil-covered sailors were struggling in the water around the ship. Some were on fire from burning oil. Japanese aircraft continued to strafe survivors in the water. The attack was still in progress. But remembering the men still trapped in the radio room below, England made a fateful decision. He returned to the sinking ship's interior. This decision would cost him his life, but it would also make him a hero. 3 times he descended into the capsizing battleship. Each time he successfully guided a trapped sailor to safety. The passages were rapidly filling with water and oil. The ship's electrical system had failed completely. This plunged the interior into absolute darkness. England had to navigate by touch and memory alone. He fought against rushing water and the ship's increasing list. The ship was tilting more severely with each passing minute. On his 4th attempt to rescue his shipmates, Ensign England disappeared into Oklahoma's flooding compartments. He was never seen again. He became one of 429 officers and men who perished aboard Oklahoma that day. His body was never recovered from the wreckage. The tragedy of USS Oklahoma was one of Pearl Harbor's most horrific events. As the ship capsized, hundreds of men were trapped in air pockets within her hull. For days after the attack, salvage workers could hear tapping from inside the ship. Trapped sailors were signaling for help with whatever they could find. Heroic efforts were made to cut through the hull and rescue survivors. Cutting through the thick armor plating was extremely difficult. It required specialized equipment and enormous effort. Eventually, 32 men were saved from inside the capsized hull. But for most of the trapped sailors, including Ensign England, there would be no rescue. They died slowly in the darkness as their air ran out. Initially, Ensign England was buried among the unknown casualties at Punchbowl National Cemetery in Hawaii. His remains would not be identified until 2016. Advances in DNA technology finally allowed him to be returned home to Colorado Springs. There he was reburied next to his parents, with full military honors. Though he received only a Purple Heart for his sacrifice, his extraordinary heroism would be commemorated through warships bearing his name. Not one, but two ships would honor his memory. DE-635 and the later guided missile cruiser CG-22 both carried the England name. The Buckley-class destroyer escorts were purpose-built submarine hunters. They were armed with three 3-inch guns for surface action, but they were optimized specifically for anti-submarine warfare. Their main battery was deliberately kept light to save weight and cost. While adequate for defense against aircraft and small surface craft, the guns were not the ship's primary weapons. The real striking power of these vessels lay in their anti-submarine armament. This was where they truly excelled. Their arsenal included several deadly weapon systems. One triple bank of 21-inch torpedoes provided long-range striking power. Two stern-mounted depth charge racks could deliver traditional attacks. 8 K-gun depth charge projectors could hurl charges to either side of the ship. But most importantly, each ship carried one Mark X Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. It was this last weapon that would prove decisive in the coming battles. The Hedgehog would revolutionize submarine warfare. The development of specialized anti-submarine vessels like the Buckley class reflected hard-learned lessons from the Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boats had come perilously close to severing Britain's lifelines completely. The Allies had learned that defeating submarines required more than just weapons. It demanded specialized platforms optimized specifically for the task. These ships needed long range to escort convoys across vast ocean distances. They required good sea-keeping abilities to operate in rough weather. Most importantly, they needed sophisticated detection equipment to find submerged submarines. The Buckley class incorporated all these requirements in a package that could be mass-produced in American shipyards. The Hedgehog represented a complete revolution in anti-submarine warfare. It addressed fundamental flaws that had plagued submarine hunters since World War I. The weapon was developed by the British Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development in 1941. It was first deployed operationally in 1942. The Hedgehog had only recently become widely available to American forces in late 1943. Its deployment was still expanding throughout the Pacific Fleet. The weapon's development had been driven by desperate necessity during Britain's darkest hours. U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Britain was slowly starving to death. Something revolutionary was needed to tip the balance. The weapon consisted of 24 projectiles, arranged in 6 rows of 4. They were mounted on a trainable platform that could fire them in an elliptical pattern. The projectiles would impact the water 200 to 300 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds. It contained a 35-pound charge of TNT, or Torpex explosive. The projectiles would be fired in a carefully timed sequence. All 24 would impact the water simultaneously. This created a deadly pattern approximately 140 feet by 120 feet in area. The name Hedgehog came from the weapon's appearance when loaded. The spigot mortars protruding from the launcher resembled the spines of the small mammal, but there was nothing small about the weapon's impact on naval warfare. It represented a fundamental shift in how surface ships attacked submarines. It solved problems that had bedeviled naval tacticians for decades. What made the Hedgehog truly revolutionary was its contact-fused warheads. Unlike traditional depth charges, which detonated at preset depths using hydrostatic fuses, each Hedgehog projectile would only explode on direct contact with a solid object. This fundamental difference provided several crucial advantages that would prove decisive in the battles ahead. The technology was simple but brilliant in its effectiveness. First, the success or failure of an attack was immediately apparent to everyone involved. If one or more projectiles hit a submarine, there would be explosions. If all the projectiles missed their target, there would be complete silence. Ship commanders no longer had to wait 20 minutes or more for results. They didn't have to scan the surface for oil slicks or floating debris to determine if their attack had succeeded. The feedback was instant and unmistakable. The Hedgehog system could be made ready for another attack in roughly 3 minutes. This quick turnaround time made all the difference. Enemy submarines that managed to slip away from the initial barrage often found themselves facing a second deadly volley before they could fully escape. Traditional depth charge systems took much longer to reload. During those precious minutes, submarines could vanish into the deep ocean. More importantly, the Hedgehog eliminated the sonar blackout that had haunted submarine hunters for years. Standard depth charges exploded whether they struck their target or splashed harmlessly into empty water. These massive underwater blasts created chaos beneath the surface. Sound waves bounced wildly in all directions. The attacking vessel lost its acoustic eyes for many minutes. Sometimes the disturbance lasted a quarter of an hour or more. During this period of acoustic darkness, submarines slipped away like ghosts. The explosions created walls of churning water. Air bubbles rose in thick columns. These barriers reflected sonar signals back toward the surface. Tracking became impossible. The water itself seemed to fight against the hunters. But the Hedgehog changed everything. When its projectiles missed their target, silence remained. No explosions disturbed the water. The hunting ship kept its sonar contact intact. Attack crews could line up for another strike immediately. The ocean stayed clear and readable. The psychological warfare was different too. Traditional depth charges created thunderous barrages that shook submarine hulls even when they missed. The terror was overwhelming. Crew members inside submarines felt their vessel shake like a tin can. Lights flickered. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Sometimes this psychological pressure alone forced submarines to surface in surrender. The Hedgehog was a silent assassin. Submarines had no warning an attack was coming. The projectiles arced through the air without sound. They slipped beneath the surface quietly. 7 seconds passed as they sank toward 200 feet. Submarine commanders had no time to react. No time to turn. No time to dive deeper. With stern-dropped depth charges, experienced submarine captains played a deadly game. They calculated when they entered the enemy ship's minimum detection range. Sharp, evasive turns followed. Quick dives to different depths. Rolling charges off the stern took time. Skilled commanders learned to predict exactly when explosions would come. They danced away from death with practiced moves. The Hedgehog eliminated this tactical chess match completely. Forward-firing projectiles gave no warning, no time for clever maneuvers. The geometry of attack had changed forever. War statistics would later reveal the Hedgehog's crushing effectiveness. British naval analysts compiled the numbers after the fighting ended. Traditional depth charge attacks required an average of 60 attempts to sink one submarine. Early in the war, the ratio was even more discouraging. Sometimes over 100 attacks were needed for each kill. The Hedgehog transformed these odds dramatically. One submarine died for every 5 or 6 Hedgehog attacks. The improvement was tenfold. Each Hedgehog projectile carried less explosive power than a standard depth charge, but direct hits were devastating. A single projectile striking the hull was usually enough. The contact explosion was far more destructive than near misses from depth charges. The submarine's own hull became part of the weapon. It contained and focused the explosive force inward. Pressure hulls designed to withstand ocean depths cracked like eggshells under direct explosive contact. The physics worked against the submarine instead of protecting it. The submarine I-16 now being hunted was no ordinary vessel. 9 war patrols lay behind her. Her combat record was distinguished, but would prove ultimately tragic. She belonged to the Type C-1 class, among the largest submarines in the Japanese fleet. Her length stretched 358 feet. Submerged, she displaced 3,561 tons, a massive vessel by any standard. Special equipment made her unique. A Type A midget submarine could be mounted on her deck. This capability earned I-16 a singular place in naval history. She had launched the very first midget submarine attack of the Pacific War. Her role at Pearl Harbor combined innovation with the ultimate futility of Japanese special operations. The midget submarine program had developed in complete secrecy. These tiny two-man craft were designed to slip into enemy harbors undetected. Devastating torpedo attacks would follow from within supposedly safe anchorages. 5 mother submarines carried midget craft to Pearl Harbor. I-16 was among them. In the pre-dawn hours of December 7, 1941, I-16 launched her deadly cargo. Lieutenant Junior Grade Yokoyama Masaharu commanded the midget submarine. The launch occurred at 0:42 hours. Several hours remained before the main air attack would begin. The plan called for penetrating harbor defenses in darkness. American warships would be attacked from within their own sanctuary. The fate of these midget submarines revealed a harsh gap between Japanese ambition and reality. Yokoyama's craft never returned to its mother ship. His exact fate remained unknown. But I-16 received radio transmissions believed to be from his midget on the afternoon of December 7th. The message reported a successful attack. Another transmission came early on December 8th. This one indicated navigation problems. Analysis after the war painted a different picture. None of the midget submarines successfully attacked American ships at Pearl Harbor. The destroyer USS Ward sunk one in the war's opening shots. Another was destroyed inside the harbor by USS Monaghan. One ran aground, and its sole survivor became America's first Japanese prisoner of war. 2 others simply vanished without trace. None of the 5 midget submarines launched that day returned to their mother ships. Of the 10 crewmen, only 1 survived the war as a prisoner. The others died in service to a concept that looked better on paper than in practice. 6 months later, on May 30, 1942, I-16 achieved what had eluded her at Pearl Harbor. A successful midget submarine attack became reality. Operations in the Indian Ocean brought her against British forces at Diego Suarez, Madagascar. I-16 launched another midget submarine under Ensign Iwase Katsusuke's command. This midget submarine successfully penetrated the British anchorage. Its torpedoes fired true. A hit struck the British battleship HMS Ramillies, causing severe damage. The 29,150-ton battleship was a veteran of World War I. She took on 1,800 tons of water and nearly sank. Excellent damage control saved her. Ramillies would later bombard German positions during D-Day. The midget submarine also sank the tanker British Loyalty before being lost with its crew. This success at Madagascar represented the high point of Japanese midget submarine operations. The concept could work under perfect circumstances, but it highlighted the extreme danger and typically one-way nature of such missions. During the Guadalcanal campaign, I-16 conducted multiple supply runs to isolated Japanese garrisons. Additional midget submarine attacks were launched. The submarine became part of the Tokyo Express. This desperate effort supplied Japanese forces in the Solomon Islands by submarine after surface ships could no longer safely make the journey. On November 28, 1942, she launched midget HA-10. This craft successfully torpedoed the American cargo ship USS Alchiba. The ship was forced to beach herself to avoid sinking. Alchiba carried aviation fuel and ammunition. She burned for days, but was eventually salvaged. I-16 subsequently covered the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal in early 1943. Supply runs continued to bypass garrisons in New Guinea. She survived an air attack in December 1943 that caused light damage, but her luck was running out fast. The supply missions that I-16 and her sister submarines undertook represented Japan's deteriorating strategic position. Once proud fleet submarines were reduced to carrying rice and medical supplies. Starving garrisons on bypassed islands waited for these deliveries. Each mission meant running through American aircraft and warships. The reward was delivering a few tons of supplies to troops who were ultimately doomed. It was a terrible waste of scarce submarines and trained crews. But the Japanese Navy's code of honor demanded action. No garrison would be abandoned while any means of supply remained. Honor meant more than tactical sense. On May 14, 1944, I-16 departed Truk Lagoon under Lieutenant Commander Takayuchi Yoshitaka's command. Her cargo hold carried rice packed in 75-pound rubber bags. These supplies were intended for the starving Japanese garrison at Buin on Bougainville. The garrison had been bypassed by American forces and was slowly starving. Submarine supply runs were their only lifeline. The 40,000 Japanese troops on Bougainville had been cut off since November 1943. Conditions had become desperate beyond imagination. Men died of starvation and disease daily. Reports of cannibalism reached headquarters, but I-16's departure transmission was intercepted and decoded by American intelligence. Her fate was sealed. 3 American destroyer escorts were already moving toward her predicted position. On the afternoon of May 19, 1944, an Allied reconnaissance aircraft spotted I-16 on the surface north of Bougainville. A consolidated PBY Catalina from a Navy patrol squadron confirmed the intelligence that had brought the hunter-killer group to these waters. The submarine was running on the surface to recharge her batteries. Better speed toward her destination required surface running. Japanese submarines of this period suffered from relatively weak batteries and slow underwater speeds. This forced them to spend considerable time on the surface, where aircraft and radar-equipped warships could find them. The 3 destroyer escorts immediately formed a line abreast formation. A coordinated sonar sweep of the area commenced. This formation created ships spaced at optimal sonar detection intervals. An acoustic net spread across the ocean that few submarines could escape. At 13:35 hours, England's sonar operator reported contact with a submerged submarine. The young sailor was from Iowa and had never seen the ocean before joining the Navy. The distinctive ping of the sonar return indicated a solid object at 1,350 yards range. The hunt was officially on. I-16 immediately began standard Japanese submarine evasion tactics. Radical changes in depth and direction followed. Sudden speed changes confused targeting solutions. Sharp turns pushed the submarine's hull to its structural limits. These tactics had been developed through hard experience and had saved many submarines from destruction. Japanese submarine commanders were trained to think in 3 dimensions. Depth became as important as course changes for evading attackers. Lieutenant Commander Takauchi was fighting for his life and the lives of his 106 crew members. Every maneuver mattered. Every second counted. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton brought England in for her first attack run. The approach required precise coordination between multiple stations. Sonar operators tracked the submarine's movements. The plotting team calculated the target's course and speed. The Hedgehog crew prepared their weapon system. But the first Hedgehog salvo missed completely. I-16 successfully evaded by diving deep and turning sharply at the last moment. The second attack also failed to connect. I-16 used every trick in the book. Bubbles were released to create false sonar targets. Rapid depth changes threw off range calculations. Radical course changes pushed the submarine's structural limits. On the third attack, England's Hedgehog scored a single hit, but the big submarine's strong hull absorbed the damage. She continued her desperate evasion maneuvers. The explosion would have been devastating inside the submarine. The concussion threw men against bulkheads. Light bulbs shattered throughout the vessel. Potential flooding threatened multiple compartments, but I-16's crew managed to maintain control and continue evading. Japanese damage control training was excellent. Submarine crews drilled relentlessly in dealing with battle damage. Watertight doors slammed shut. Emergency lighting flickered on. Damage control parties rushed to assess problems. Pendleton demonstrated remarkable persistence and tactical skill. He set up for a fourth attack, which again missed the violently maneuvering submarine. By now the hunt had continued for over an hour. Tension aboard England was thick enough to cut with a knife. The crew knew they had a submarine trapped, but couldn't deliver the killing blow. In the plotting room, officers worked frantically to predict I-16's next move. Charts were marked with projected courses. Speed calculations were updated constantly. The mathematical battle continued beneath the surface. Sonar operators strained to maintain contact as the submarine dove deeper. She was approaching thermal layers where temperature differences in the water could hide her from sonar. Sound waves bent strangely in these zones. Detection became much more difficult. But, on the fifth attack run, England's Hedgehog crew had learned from their previous attempts. They noticed patterns in I-16's evasion tactics. A tendency to turn to port when diving became apparent. Preferences for certain depth bands were observed. Experience was becoming their teacher. At 14:35 hours, multiple projectiles found their mark. The ocean erupted in massive destruction. The underwater explosion that followed was so powerful it lifted England's stern completely out of the water. Men were thrown to the deck throughout the ship. The entire vessel rattled like a tin can. The explosion was heard and felt on the other destroyer escorts thousands of yards away. 20 minutes later, oil and debris began rising to the surface. Rice bags floated up first. Pieces of wood followed. Cork insulation bobbed in the waves. Other unmistakable evidence confirmed that I-16 had been destroyed. Among the debris were personal effects that brought the human cost into sharp focus. A sailor's cap floated silently on the surface. Pages from a Japanese book spread across the water. A wooden sandal drifted alone. These poignant reminders of human lives lost gave faces to the statistics of war. The submarine that had launched the first attack at Pearl Harbor was gone forever. All 107 officers and men went down with their ship. Lieutenant Commander Takauchi died with his crew. They had perished in service of a lost cause. The rice they carried would never reach its destination. The garrison would surrender when the war ended anyway. Meanwhile, 7 submarines of the NA line had departed Saipan around May 17, 1944. They were heading to take up their assigned patrol positions. The departure had been marked by an elaborate ceremony. Vice Admiral Takagi himself attended to see them off. The admiral exhorted the submarine commanders to do their duty for the emperor. Each captain received a ceremonial cup of sake. White headbands inscribed with patriotic slogans were presented. They knew the odds against their survival were extremely high. American anti-submarine capabilities had improved dramatically since the war's early days. All 7 were RO-class boats. Type RO-100 submarines were much smaller than I-16. Originally designed for coastal defense, these 760-ton boats carried 4 torpedo tubes in the bow. 8 torpedoes total comprised their armament. A 70 cm deck gun provided surface firepower. The design reflected pre-war Japanese naval thinking that emphasized quality over quantity. This resulted in submarines that were well built, but too few in number. They lacked the mass production advantages that made American submarines so effective. Most were equipped with Type 22 radar detectors, but lacked radar themselves. This made them poorly suited for the reconnaissance mission they had been assigned. Their job was to spot American carrier forces and report their movements. Without radar, they would have to spend dangerous amounts of time on the surface. Visual lookouts would be their only eyes. Of the 20 Type RO-100 submarines Japan would build during the war, not a single one would survive to see the surrender. The first submarine of the NA line to meet its fate was RO-1006. This submarine had already compiled a notable war record despite her small size. On July 18, 1943, during operations in the Solomon Islands, RO-1006 had torpedoed the American tank landing ship LST-3422. The attack occurred in Blanche Channel near New Georgia. The torpedo detonated the LST's ammunition stores. A catastrophic explosion blew the ship completely in half. The stern section sank immediately beneath the waves. The forward section remained afloat long enough to be towed to shore. Among the 121 men killed were the ship's entire mess division of African-American stewards and cooks. Also killed was the renowned artist Lieutenant Commander McLean Barkley. Barkley had created many of the war's most famous recruiting posters. He had volunteered for combat duty despite his valuable skills. His death was a loss to both the Navy and American culture. RO-1006 had survived serious damage from airdropped depth charges in October 1943. She returned to service after extensive repairs. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 22, 1944, at 0350 hours, Georgia's radar operator detected a surface contact. The blip on the screen proved to be RO-1006. The submarine was running on the surface under cover of darkness. Battery recharging was a necessary but dangerous operation that left submarines vulnerable to radar-equipped enemies. George illuminated the submarine with a 24-inch searchlight. The powerful beam caught her completely by surprise. Her Type 22 radar detector had failed to function properly. She was blind to the approaching destroyer escort. The beam of light would have been blinding to the submarine's bridge watch. The lookouts had been using night vision to scan for enemies. Despite the complete surprise, RO-1006's crew reacted quickly. A crash dive began before George could bring her guns to bear. The submarine's officer of the deck ordered an emergency dive. Within seconds, the bridge was cleared. The submarine was heading under. The dive took less than 40 seconds. This was well within Japanese Navy standards, but it wasn't fast enough to completely escape detection. George launched a Hedgehog attack at 04:15, but missed the frantically evading submarine. At 04:25, England gained sonar contact on RO-1006 as she attempted to escape. The submarine was making turns for 8 knots while zigzagging violently. Depth changes added another dimension to her evasion pattern. England's first Hedgehog attack missed the elusive target. But then the submarine made what may have been a fatal tactical error. RO-1006 reversed course and turned bow on to England. She was possibly attempting to fire torpedoes at her attacker. This maneuver presented a perfect target for the Hedgehog system. The submarine commander didn't understand how the new weapon worked. He thought it fired aft rather than forward. The submarine had inadvertently positioned herself directly in the Hedgehog's kill zone. England's second attack scored at least 3 direct hits. The explosions would have been catastrophic inside the small submarine. The hull breached in multiple places. Water rushed in at tremendous pressure. Electrical systems shorted out in showers of sparks. Emergency lighting failed throughout the vessel. The submarine broke up immediately, as her pressure hull collapsed. She plunged toward the ocean floor like a stone. RO-1006 was lost, with all 49 hands. The entire action from first radar contact to the submarine's destruction had taken just 36 minutes. Speed and precision had won the day for the Americans. Another enemy submarine would never threaten Allied shipping again. The next day brought another deadly encounter. RO-1004 was under the command of Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi. She had spent most of her previous patrols in the frigid waters of the North Pacific and Aleutian Islands. This was a stark contrast to the tropical waters where she now hunted. The North Pacific had been a secondary theater for Japanese submarines. It was used mainly for reconnaissance missions. Occasional attacks on the supply line between the United States and Soviet Union provided some action. But it was cold, dangerous work with little reward. During operations in the Solomons in late 1943, RO-1004 had performed a remarkable rescue mission. On November 3, 1943, she saved 75 survivors of the Japanese light cruiser Sendai. The cruiser had been sunk in a night surface action with American cruisers during the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. The rescue had been performed under extremely dangerous conditions. American aircraft patrolled overhead constantly. The threat of discovery by American warships was ever present. Among those rescued was Rear Admiral Baron Matsuji Ijuin. He commanded Japanese destroyer Squadron 3. His survival was considered vital to the Imperial Navy. On May 23, 1944, at 06:04 hours, an Allied aircraft spotted RO-1004 on the surface. The submarine was approximately 250 nautical miles north-northwest of Caviang, New Ireland. This time, the submarine's radar detector worked perfectly. It gave just enough warning for an emergency dive. The submarine's lookouts spotted the aircraft at almost the same moment the radar detector alarm sounded. She quickly submerged before the destroyer escorts could close to gun range. But the hunt was just beginning. The ocean depths became RO-104's final battlefield, as her captain unleashed every survival trick in his arsenal. Below the surface, desperation drove innovation. The submarine commander knew his vessel's sisters had already perished. Their deaths were lessons written in blood and twisted metal. Robbie closed in for the killing blow. Her crew prepared the Hedgehog mortars with mechanical precision. But RO-104 had evolved beyond her fallen sisters. The submarine didn't just dive and run. She fought back with technology born from desperation. Sound waves pulsed through the water in calculated bursts. Each transmission was precisely tuned. The acoustic pulses jammed Robbie's sonar like static, overwhelming a radio signal. Japanese submariners had perfected this deception through trial and error. Too many boats had died to perfect this last desperate measure. The technique worked with deadly efficiency. Robbie's sonar operators stared at their screens in confusion. Their instruments showed false echoes. Ghost contacts appeared and vanished. Real targets merged with phantom signals. The submarine had become invisible in plain sight. 4 times Robbie launched her Hedgehog salvos. Each attack followed careful calculations. Each salvo screamed through the water toward empty ocean. RO-104 twisted away from every strike. Her hull groaned under the stress of violent maneuvers. But she remained intact. She remained fighting. 2 hours passed like eternity underwater. Battery acid filled the air with choking fumes. Carbon dioxide built to dangerous levels. The submarine's life support systems wheezed and struggled. Every breath became precious. Every movement consumed power they couldn't spare. George moved in with fresh determination. Her crew had watched Robbie's frustration with growing anger. Now they would succeed where others had failed. The destroyer escorts engines thrummed with purposeful energy. 5 separate attack runs followed in quick succession. Each Hedgehog spread followed precise calculations. Each salvo promised destruction. But RO-104's captain fought with the skill of a master. He read the water like ancient mariners read the stars. The submarine danced between the falling projectiles. She dove when depth charges exploded above. She climbed when mortars burst below. Her captain anticipated every move. His crew responded with practiced efficiency. But physics worked against them. Every evasion cost precious battery power. Air grew thick and foul inside the steel tube. Men gasped for oxygen that barely sustained life. The submarine's hull creaked under pressure from above and within. Still they fought. Still they evaded. Still they refused to die easily. At 08-119, England entered the deadly dance. Her first Hedgehog attack missed by yards. Projectiles exploded harmlessly in RO-104's wake. But England's sonar operators possessed something their predecessors lacked. They had watched. They had learned. They had memorized every pattern. Over 2 hours of careful observation revealed the submarine's habits. RO-104 always turned to starboard when diving deep. She preferred depths between 200 and 250 feet, like a comfortable depth zone. Before major course changes, she accelerated briefly. These tiny patterns became her death warrant. England's second attack incorporated every observed detail. The Hedgehog mortars arced through the air with mathematical precision. They struck water in a calculated pattern. They sank toward a submarine whose next move had been predicted perfectly. Between 10 and 12 projectiles found their target simultaneously. The underwater explosions merged into one massive detonation. Water compressed and expanded with violent force. The shockwave traveled through liquid and steel alike. Metal screamed as RO-104's hull collapsed. Compartments imploded in sequence like dominoes falling. The submarine's death cry echoed through the depths. Then silence returned to the ocean floor. Not until 10:45 did evidence reach the surface. Debris floated up like pieces of a scattered puzzle. Wooden decking bobbed between oil slicks. Cork insulation drifted in expanding patterns. Clothing and personal items told stories that would never be finished. The oil slick spread like black blood on blue water. It marked another submarine's grave, another crew lost to the depths. 58 men had descended with RO-104. None would see sunlight again. A life ring surfaced among the debris. Japanese characters painted on white cork confirmed the kill beyond doubt. The hunter-killer group's efficiency was becoming legendary. 4 days had brought 3 submarine kills, but the ocean held more prey. May 24th dawned with another contact on the radar screens. RO-116 was relatively fresh from the shipyards. Only 6 months had passed since her commissioning. Her second war patrol was still young when death found her. Lieutenant Commander Shibuya Kunio commanded men barely out of training. The submarine school at Kure had rushed them through abbreviated courses. Young sailors who had dreamed of naval glory now faced reality's harsh awakening. Japan was losing this war. Everyone knew it. Few admitted it aloud. Georgia's radar painted the target at 17,000 yards. Nearly 10 miles separated hunter from prey. The detection range was exceptional even for modern equipment. Atmospheric conditions had aligned perfectly. Radio waves traveled farther through the charged air. The contact appeared 225 nautical miles north-northwest of Kavieng. Open ocean surrounded both vessels. No land offered sanctuary. No friendly forces could intervene. This would be decided by skill and luck alone. RO-116 dove immediately when radar found her, but her crash dive lacked the desperate speed of veteran crews. Inexperience showed in hesitant maneuvers. Training couldn't replicate the terror of actual combat. Theory meant nothing when death approached from above. George closed the distance with predatory patience. At 0150 hours, sonar contact locked on at just 750 yards. The submarine employed every tactic her crew had learned. Violent rudder shifts threw her from side to side. Radical depth changes confused the hunters above. Sophisticated jamming equipment transmitted false signals, the same acoustic deception that had saved RO-104 temporarily. But RO-116's crew lacked the experience to use it effectively. Their patterns became predictable. Their responses grew slower with each attack run. George made multiple passes without success. Each Hedgehog salvo missed by margins that grew smaller. The submarine was learning, but she was learning too slowly. Death approached with mathematical inevitability. England moved in to finish what George had started. 2 Hedgehog attacks failed when targeting solutions collapsed at the last moment. The submarine still fought, still evaded, still refused to surrender to the depths. But inexperience finally betrayed them. Their evasion patterns had become readable. Their timing had grown predictable. England's crew recognized the signs. They had seen this dance before. The third attempt was perfect. At 0214 hours at least, 3 projectiles struck home. The explosions were sharp and final. But something was different about this destruction. The submarine died quietly. No massive secondary explosions lit the depths. No torpedo warheads detonated in sympathetic blasts. RO-116 simply came apart and sank. The quiet death suggested hits away from the torpedo room, or safety procedures that prevented chain reactions. Either way, the result was identical. RO-116 broke apart like a toy dropped from great height. All 56 hands rode her down into darkness. Another life ring would mark another grave. Another oil slick would stain the Pacific. 2 days later, May 26th brought RO-108 within range of the killer group. Lieutenant Obari Kanichi commanded a submarine with proven combat experience. This boat had already tasted American blood. Her crew knew the price of both victory and survival. October 3, 1943, remained fresh in memory. RO-105 had stalked 3 American destroyers in Huon Gulf off New Guinea. The attack had been textbook perfect. 4 torpedoes fired in a calculated spread. Maximum probability of hits against overlapping targets. The destroyers had been pinging actively with sonar. Their acoustic signatures painted targets for Japanese torpedo men. RO-108 had maneuvered into perfect position. Her crew had calculated angles and speed with mathematical precision. USS Smith detected the torpedo wakes first. Her captain ordered emergency speed and full rudder. The destroyer combed the wakes successfully. White foam marked where death had passed inches away. But USS Henley was not so fortunate that day. 2 torpedoes struck her port side amidships. The hits were devastating. No. 1 fire room exploded in flames and steam. Fuel tanks ruptured. Massive flooding began immediately. The destroyer's keel broke under the impact. Henley broke in two and sank rapidly. 15 men died in the explosions and flooding. 52 others suffered wounds that would mark them forever. Smith and USS Reed counterattacked with depth charges, but RO-108 had already escaped into the depths. December 17, 1943, had brought different dangers. A PBY Catalina flying boat caught RO-108 on the surface. The submarine was recharging batteries when death approached from the sky. Depth charges from the aircraft caused serious damage. The submarine went down by the stern. Water poured through damaged hull plates. The crew faced death by drowning in their own boat. But heroic damage control efforts saved them. Men worked in flooded compartments. They shored up bulkheads with whatever materials they could find. Months of repairs at Truk had followed, but RO-108 had returned to service. She had survived when others had died. Now she faced her final test in these same waters. At 2303 hours on May 26th, Robbie's radar found her target. RO-108 appeared at 15,000 yards range. The contact was 110 nautical miles northeast of Seidler Harbor at Manus Island. England also gained radar contact before the submarine could dive. Once submerged, England locked onto the target at 1,650 yards. The submarine was making maximum speed underwater. Her captain was trying to open range before the destroyer escorts could attack. Battery power flowed like lifeblood through electric motors. Robbie was vectored in for the first attack. Her Hedgehog salvo arced through the air and struck water in a calculated pattern. But RO-108 had turned inside the attack run. The maneuver required precise timing and nerves of steel. The projectiles exploded harmlessly astern. At 2323 hours, England commenced her own attack run. No prolonged hunt would be needed this time. The submarine's previous battle damage had weakened her hull. Multiple hits from depth charges had compromised her structural integrity. England's Hedgehog scored between 4 and 6 direct hits. The first salvo was also the last. Multiple explosions tore the submarine apart instantly. The weakened hull couldn't withstand such concentrated destruction. RO-108 imploded like a collapsed tin can. All 53 hands died in seconds. Another oil slick spread on dark water. Another crew joined their brothers in the depths. By now, Japanese naval intelligence was growing alarmed. May 27, 1944, brought intercepted American communications. The messages described submarine kills north of the Admiralty Islands. American reports were growing increasingly jubilant in tone. Japanese radio intelligence wasn't as sophisticated as its American counterpart. But they could still intercept and partially decode enemy transmissions. The pattern was becoming clear. The NA line was being systematically destroyed. Warning messages went out immediately on multiple frequencies. Repetition ensured reception despite jamming and distance. The remaining submarines received orders to abandon their patrol areas. Most would comply. Some would survive. Others would ignore the warnings and die. RO-112 received the warning and cleared the area immediately. She would survive this encounter only to meet USS Batfish off Luzon. February 11, 1945 would bring her destruction with all 61 hands lost. But that death lay months in the future. RO-109 also received the warning and escaped the killing zone. She too was living on borrowed time. USS Horace Bass would sink her off Okinawa on May 7, 1945. All hands would be lost. But for now, she lived and ran. RO-105 under Lieutenant Junichi Inoue either never received the warning or chose to ignore it. Perhaps her radio was damaged. Perhaps her captain felt duty-bound to maintain station. Perhaps pride overcame prudence. The reasons would die with him. The submarine had sortied from Saipan on May 14, 1944. Captain Ryonosuke Kato, commander of Submarine Division 51, was embarked. His presence aboard made abandoning the patrol area virtually impossible. Division commanders didn't retreat without explicit orders. RO-105 had survived close calls before. August 12, 1943, brought 2 torpedoes from USS Tautog. Only violent evasive action had saved them. The American submarine had achieved perfect firing position. But alert lookouts spotted the torpedo wakes just in time. September 1943 saw RO-105 firing at the light cruiser USS Columbia. The torpedoes missed when the cruiser detected them and evaded successfully. Such near misses were becoming common. American anti-submarine warfare was improving rapidly. RO-105 had also rescued downed Japanese aviators on multiple occasions. These operations earned gratitude from the Naval Air Service, but they also required surfacing in daylight near enemy territory. Each rescue was a calculated risk that could have ended in disaster. After sinking RO-108, the 3 destroyer escorts needed ammunition resupply. They proceeded to Seidler Harbor at Manus, in the Admiralty Islands. Hedgehog projectiles were loaded with urgent efficiency. Every hour in port was an hour enemies could escape. Upon departure, they joined a larger hunter-killer task group. The force centered on escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay. Destroyers USS Hazelwood, USS Heermann, USS Hole, and USS McCord provided additional firepower. Destroyer escort USS Spangler completed the surface screen. The carrier's aircraft could search vast ocean areas. Air power would vector surface ships to submarine contacts. The combination of air and surface hunters created an inescapable net. Any submarine caught within it faced almost certain destruction. During the night of May 30 to 31, Hazelwood gained radar contact on RO-105. The submarine dove immediately and began evasive maneuvers. What followed became one of the war's most prolonged submarine hunts. Hour after hour, the chase continued through darkness. RO-105's captain pulled every trick from his manual. Debris was discharged to create false sonar targets. Oil slicks simulated damage to confuse attackers. Maneuvers so violent they pushed the hull to structural limits. The submarine fought with desperate creativity. Multiple ships took turns attacking through the night. Hazelwood gained sonar contact and dropped conventional depth charges. Explosions sent geysers of water high into the air, but the submarine survived each attack. Her hull was strongly built with multiple watertight compartments. George made several Hedgehog attacks during the hunt. One salvo may have scored 3 hits. Explosions echoed through the depths. But incredibly, RO-105 continued maneuvering and fighting. Japanese submarines were built to absorb punishment and keep fighting. Dawn on May 31st revealed a calm sea marked by oil slicks. The submarine had been hit multiple times. Casualties had surely occurred aboard her, but her crew maintained watertight integrity. They continued evading. They refused to surrender. Spangler joined the attack as sunrise painted the ocean gold and red. Her Hedgehog attack missed when RO-105 made a radical turn. The submarine was still fighting after hours of continuous assault. Her persistence was becoming legendary among the hunters. Commander Haynes, still aboard, George transmitted a message that would become naval legend. "Go ahead, England," carried both frustration and acknowledgement. England's success rate was unmatched. If anyone could finish this stubborn submarine, it was her crew. England's crew had been watching their sisters attack without success. They were eager for their chance. They had observed RO-105's evasion patterns all night. Subtle habits had emerged. A slight hesitation before major turns. Preference for certain depth bands under attack. At 07:36 hours, England's Hedgehog salvo found its mark. The attack was devastating. Between 6 and 10 projectiles struck simultaneously. The resulting detonation dwarfed even I-16's spectacular destruction. Secondary explosions followed, as RO-105's own torpedoes detonated. The violence was extraordinary. A column of water shot hundreds of feet skyward. The shockwave could be felt through ship hulls miles away. RO-105 was literally blown apart. Captain Cato and all 55 hands died instantly in the massive explosion. Oil and debris spread for miles across the surface. recognizable pieces of hull floated among wooden decking and personal effects. It was a grim reminder of modern warfare's destructive totality. Nothing remained of RO-105 but scattered wreckage and memories. In just 12 days from May 19th to May 31st, 1944, USS England had sunk 6 Japanese submarines. The feat was unparalleled in anti-submarine warfare history. England was not a powerful destroyer, but a modest destroyer escort. She was just 5 months out of the shipyard on her first war patrol. The statistics spoke eloquently of her achievement. 7 submarines had been assigned to the NA line. 6 were destroyed. 5 fell to England's Hedgehog. Only RO-109 escaped, and she would die off Okinawa less than a year later. England's success created ripples far beyond immediate tactical victory. Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Ernest J. King, sent a message carrying the weight of promise. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy, recognized both unprecedented achievement and the heroic sacrifice that inspired her crew. USS England received the Presidential Unit Citation. Only 3 destroyer escort crews in World War II earned this honor. The citation read in part, "For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines in the Pacific War area from May 19th to 31, 1944. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton received the Navy Cross for his leadership during the submarine killing spree, but historians noted that Executive Officer Lieutenant John A. Williamson deserved equal credit. Williamson had conducted endless drills. He had refined attack procedures and maintained crew readiness during long months of routine patrols. The strategic implications exceeded what Navy leadership initially realized. Loss of the NA line submarines convinced Japanese commanders that large American forces had passed through the area. They believed the destination was Western Carolines or Western New Guinea rather than the actual target. This misinterpretation caused Admiral Toyota to delay and misdirect Operation A-Go execution. Japanese fleet units wasted precious fuel moving to wrong positions. By the time they realized their error and repositioned to defend the Marianas, it was too late. American invasion of Saipan began June 15, 1944, catching Japanese fleet out of position. The resulting Battle of the Philippine Sea, fought June 19 to 20, 1944, saw Japanese naval aviation destroyed as an effective force. Over 400 Japanese aircraft were shot down against minimal American losses. 3 Japanese carriers were sunk in what American pilots called the Marianas Turkey Shoot. The myth of Japanese naval aviation superiority was permanently shattered. Loss of the Marianas brought American B-29 bombers within range of Japanese home islands, sealing Japan's fate. Although the U.S. Navy attempted to keep England's success secret, Japanese naval intelligence correctly deduced that submarine losses were due to American radio intelligence. Internal reports acknowledged that codes had been compromised, yet incredibly, they persisted in believing main naval codes remained secure. This denial would cost them dearly in the war's remaining year. American code breakers continued reading Japanese messages. They directed American forces to intercept Japanese ships and submarines. The intelligence advantage that had made England's success possible continued working until Japan's surrender. The story of USS England ultimately transcends its specific historical moment. It becomes something universal, a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and determination facing mortal danger. In war's darkest hours, when nations clash and millions of fates hang in balance, ordinary people can rise to meet extraordinary challenges. The crew of USS England did exactly that in May 1944. Their achievement will be remembered as long as naval history is studied and tales of courage at sea are told. They wrote their names indelibly in history's annals through skill, bravery, and determination that turned a modest destroyer escort into legend.